And I'm going to take the screen down.
Okay.
Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I think last week, we'll start here. Last week we talked about control flow, and I think we kind of plowed through that. And I think Jeffrey at that point was trying to get a date from prom, and he was getting turned down. Is that right, Jeffrey? Is that where we ended?
Yeah, so it was not getting any luck, especially not with Jane.
Yeah, Jane wasn't getting Jeffrey. She was getting the side eye. So let's start by asking if there's any questions about control flow, because today I'm going to introduce a couple things. We're going to introduce what we call a try-catch, which is also part of exception planning, but in some UiPath considers exception planning. I think you'll find some developers consider it part of control flow. And then we're going to kind of give you a brief look at the RE framework. And we talked about that a little bit last week on that pre-built template for a state machine. So I'll start. Is there any questions that anybody has about control flow that Jeffrey or any of us can help you with? Going once, twice. All right, I'll take silence as everybody's up to speed and as experienced in control flow or will be. If you do have questions, we can always start next week's session answering those questions about control flow, because I think your Dr. Newfield said that you're partway through that. So let's talk today about try-catches. I'm going to open up my studio real quick so I can show you a try-catch, and I'll share that screen with you as well. But let me, because you all know how much I love slides. So we only have like 4 or 5 slides today. We're going to spend a lot of time in the studio instead of on slides. So let's talk about try-catch. Try-catch is error and exception handling in studio. I don't know anybody correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know many developers that do not extensively use try-catches in our automations. But when we deal with errors and exceptions, they are things that can kill your automation, stop your bot from progressing, and we need to learn how to handle those. Now, we'll touch on these again further into the class, but just to give you an introduction of what a try-catch is and what the structure of it looks like. System exceptions. We generally look at system exceptions as exceptions that have to do with systems. Sometimes when we're working with user interfaces, that interface is updated. Selectors change. Sometimes you have what we call dynamic rendering, which means that the interface is not really an interface. It's just a picture of the interface that comes up. The selectors are not always found. It's going to be especially found when you start dealing with enterprise accounting systems, resource programs, things like that. So exceptions we have to account for. If we can't find a selector, which you'll get into a little bit later with UI interactions, we can't find something that the bot's looking for, or that system we've programmed that automation to look for in that system, and that system has changed or the bot can't find it, the bot's going to stop it, it's going to fail, and it's not going to go forward, which is a problem sometimes, especially when we're working with bots that run behind the scenes, which we call unattended bots. And I think we covered that very early in this process, attended versus unattended. Remember, attended bots work with you on the computer screen. You can interact with it through kind of like what Jeffrey was doing last week, asking about his dates, names, and is he going to prom, those things. Unattended bots don't necessarily give you the option of asking those questions. They run behind the system. And so when we have system errors, that automation, that bot stops working. And it could stop working in some very inconvenient places and processing data and partially processing data, which can cause problems in some systems. Then you have what we call business exceptions over here. These guys are things that the bot is looking for that the business has said would be there. For example, let's say the bot's reading an Excel spreadsheet, and that Excel spreadsheet, someone has changed a column on that Excel spreadsheet, and we were under the impression when we were building that Excel spreadsheet would be static throughout the entire tenure of this automation. That's going to be a business exception. The bot can't find something that should be there that it's expecting to see, but is not. It's because the business changed, not system related, business change. So we handle business exceptions and we handle system exceptions within what we call a try-catch. And again, I'll reiterate this. This is a form of exception handling, error and exception handling, but it also controls what your bot does and how your bot handles these. So in my mind, and in some developers' minds, it becomes part of it kind of sits on that gray area of exception handling and control. So let's talk about what a system try-catch does, then I'll show you a picture of one, and then we'll jump into the RE framework. And today in the RE framework, we're going to be making cookies, and I'll tell you about Mrs. Brown, my high school home economics teacher who failed me in class. But we'll start with try-catch. This is a try-catch. This is the part where we're going to drop something in there that we wanted to do. For example, last week when Jeffrey was trying to determine what kind of outfit he was going to wear, or if he was going to prom. And we may expect, and I remember last week, Jeffrey was having some problems with his date formula. Well, that would be what we would call an exception to that rule, that process. And so we would try to do what Jeffrey was doing with dates last week. And if that failed, we would drop down here into a catch, and we would tell the bot how to handle that error and what kind of error it is. And then we would go into this finally state. And in some cases, we don't put anything in the finally state. We just go on with our workflow if the catch is taken care of and the try is done. So let's look at what one looks like. Let me switch my screen share to my studio quickly. So bear with me, like we did last week. Let's stop sharing that one. I'm going to share my studio. All right, you should be able to see my studio now, hopefully. Try-catch is going to be a standard part of your activities. You can find it just by going up here, do a try-catch.
So Chris, I'm not seeing anything on your screen.
You know?
No.
Bear with me. I'm losing Zoom for some reason. Hold on, Diane. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Sorry about that, guys.
No worries.
All right. We can start by going up here into this activities panel, and we can type in try. Don't even need to do the whole thing. We can put in a try catch. We can either drag it, or we can click on this little guy here, like Andre showed you some time ago, and add a try catch this way. Either way, they're both the same try catch. You can see the same structure. We'll take one of these guys away. So the activity, we're going to drop an activity here. This is the things that Jeffrey was doing, just a normal activity. We can be looking for a particular part of a web UI. We can be looking for a particular column on an Excel spreadsheet, anything that we want to be doing. We want the bot to try it. And if the bot cannot complete this task, we jump down into this catch thing and we add a new catch. And catch just simply means we're adding a new, what the bot's going to do in case it cannot complete it. So let's say we were working on a web UI, user interface, and we cannot find the selector or something like that. So we can use these are defaults: argument exception, no reference exception, system IO is a data file exception, invalid operation exception, or plain system exception. Anything that, if it's a system exception, most of us are going to opt for system exception. However, you can add more than one catch. And if you want to get more sophisticated in your exceptions, you can do browse for types. And you can do up here selector. Let's start talking selector. Selector not found exception, which is what we would be looking for on a web UI. And we can create another catch here. And then each of these catches, we tell the bot what to do. We tell the bot, hey, we're going to stop, or hey, we're going to do something different. And the same thing, selector not found exception. We can tell the bot whatever to do when it encounters an error. Hold on, my Teams is going off here. The same thing with the business rule exception. We can do business exception. Let's say a business exception is, and let's say it's an Excel exception, right? Excel exception. We can do an Excel exception here, and let's say the Excel file is coming through wrong, or there's something corrupt in the Excel file, which happens sometimes, or if we have some what we call Excel garbage, when we encounter Excel files, which is hidden items in an Excel file that we don't necessarily see, but the bot sees that are underlying in the Excel file. It could be old formulas somewhere on one of the cells in the Excel file. It could be anything in that Excel file that is hidden from our eyes, but the bot sees. Those would be some like Excel exceptions. Those would be exceptions, right? And then we can down here the finally. This finally state would be, after all of this is done, we've tried it, we've handled our exceptions. Now, finally, what are we going to do? We're going to go on and do something else. We're going to possibly end the automation, depending on how sensitive what you're working with is. I know we use this block a lot in the federal system, especially to control PII leakage, which is personally identified information, which you can imagine the federal government works with a lot. Sensitive data, things like that. We can go on to handle that after all this is done. Quick overview of a try-catch, but typically, and you'll see when we start working when we look at the RE framework in a moment, you're going to see a lot of try-catches because we use a lot of try-catches to catch exceptions. Because we may know what an exception is, and we try and plan as much as we can when we're building and we're kind of determining what the process is that we're automating is, what are the possible exceptions? And as a developers, and eventually as if you go into the development realm or something along that lines, you'll learn very quickly to start thinking about, okay, what if this happens? What do we do? What if this happens? What do we do? Because if you think about it, let's say you go into a business and you're automating something for that business. And Susan Jones has been doing this process for 15 years, and she knows that if this button doesn't work, she just does this. And for 15 years, that becomes her new process. And so you come in and you're taking this over for Susan Jones to do RPA development. We're going back, if you think about it, bot's brain is totally empty and you're filling it with the process and you're encountering these exceptions for the first time, where Susan Jones has this automatic workaround in her head that she does. She may not think to tell you that, and you may encounter that original exception that Susan Jones originally encountered. So we really have to start thinking about what can possibly go wrong with our automation. What can happen? A lot of what and what do we do, what and what do we do? That's where try-catches come in handy. Okay. Any questions on try-catches? Again, a high-level overview, and we're going to get into exceptions more, but this is kind of part of controlling your bot. Again, you're going to see that when we jump into the RE framework in a minute and make some cookies. Questions about that before I go on? Now, this is not going to be in your self-study. We're kind of jumping ahead and filling some time here, trying to introduce you to some new concepts. You can go forward and start looking at try-catches, but the next section you go into on Excel and then the UIs are not necessarily going to have try-catches in there, but just so you're aware they're there and they're part of that control process. Okay. All right, let's go into the RE framework. And let's talk about some things to consider with the RE framework. If you go to your template, now my landing page may look different than yours. I'm in 2023-10-7. You may be in 2024. And so you may have to go down here to more templates, or yours may have a list of templates here, right? So if I go in and I find our robotic enterprise framework here, or I can go into more templates and I can search for robotic enterprise. Well, maybe. Oh, there it is, right above my face. Robotic enterprise framework here. Either way, we're just going to open up an RE framework. Let me try this. I don't want to give you one that I've already dorked with. So let me go back into where I was. And just open it from here. And I'll give it a minute to open. I'm going to save our template, our try-catch. And so while this is opening, I'll tell you about Mrs. Brown. So when I was in high school, which was a very long time ago, I was on the football team, and we all decided that we were going to take a blow-off class, which was Mrs. Brown's home economic class. And we figured that it would be an easy class because Mrs. Brown kind of leaned against the wall because she was about 87 years old, and we felt that she leaned against the wall because she couldn't stand up on her own. So we felt it would be an easy class. And the first thing Mrs. Brown had us do was make a shirt, which I failed horribly because I sewed my shirt together and would never be able to put it on, right? But then we had to make cookies, which I failed horribly because my cookies almost set this classroom on fire. But let's talk about Mrs. Brown. We're going to use that in association with the RE framework. Okay, this is the RE framework, the pre-built template. Some developers, including myself, we modified this in some ways. That's a little bit more advanced than what we're going into today. Some developers do their files differently, but we're just going to the basic RE framework so you're familiar with it. The RE framework, again, is not going to be covered in your next few sessions, but we're introducing it to you here because Jeffrey and I talked about it last week. This is a state machine, the RE framework is, and it contains the initialization state, get transaction data state, your process, and then your end process, right? Within the RE framework, you also have what we call a configuration file. Some developers do their configuration files differently, but I typically use the configuration file that's within the RE framework. UiPath suggests that the RE framework is best practice. In fact, if you ever go out looking at least at this point in time, if you ever went out looking for a job in the RPA industry, you'll find a lot of job descriptions that will indicate familiarity with the RE framework. So it's good to know the RE framework, and then as you get more advanced in your skills and in your ability to determine processes and map those processes, you may be working with a solution architect or a business analyst in that process. You can determine if you need to modify your framework, cannibalize your framework, totally destroy your framework, and opt for something differently. But we generally like to use the RE framework because it has built-in exception planning, including screenshots and things like that, which screenshots are important. The bot's able to take a picture of a screen. These are important when you're working with unattended bots that interact with systems, because we don't see what the bot's doing when it's operating in the systems and unattended. But when the bot encounters an error, the RE framework will allow it to take a screenshot, which will show us what that error is and what it's encountering on that screen, instead of, so that we know how to troubleshoot, how to maintain, and how to break fix that error. Okay, so your config file's up in here. And it's just a plain Excel file. Some people will move this into, can you all see my config file? Or do I need to reshare?
You might need to, might be refreshing. It looks all like
It looks like it's in
an overlay.
transition. Yeah.
You can't see it?
Yeah, like something's blocking it on top.
Hold on. Stand by. I have to find my Zoom screen here, guys. Try that. Can you see the config file?
You can see a spreadsheet.
Yep, that's config. Config file has three tabs: settings, constants, and assets, right? We're not going to go into assets very much and constants, but just so you know, settings is where we would we can set variables and definitions and explain what they are. The bot's going to read these two columns. Constants are things like are constants. They're things that the bot's going to take into consideration the same every time unless you change it. And then assets. We can control assets the bot uses within the automation using the config file. Again, Different developers can use the config file differently. As you go through the academy, however, UiPath is going to teach you how to use the config file in this manner with these tabs. And if you take any exams in UiPath that include RE framework, it's going to be referring to this config file with these tabs and this functionality. So let me go back to the RE framework, share my screen again differently because I seem to have to jump through different pages here. So let's go back. I'm going to stop sharing this guy, and I'm going to go back and share my studio. Hold on. I know this can be aggravating, and I apologize for that. All right. You should see my studio again. So let's think about the process of making cookies, right? The first thing we have to do when we make cookies is we have to turn on our oven and preheat that oven, right? We have to go to the grocery store and make sure we have the ingredients to make cookies, whether it be eggs, chocolate chip. If you're like me and you're lazy, you go to the store and you buy those little cookies with the faces already painted on them, but those aren't the cookies we're talking about. We're not talking Toll House here. We're talking like we're going to get our hands dirty and a mixing bowl out with some flour and sugar. We're going to make some chocolate chip cookies. And please do not take my recipe suggestions as the proper way to make chocolate chip cookies, because I am not a chocolate chip cookie maker. So do not go home and say, Mom, make these cookies, because you'll be quite disappointed. Okay, turning on our oven, preheating our oven, going to the grocery store, that's all part of things that we need to bring into our automation. We're going to do that in the initialization step.
Hey, Chris, I'm not seeing anything on your screen again.
You're not?
No.
Hold on. It shows sharing. Let's try again. This has happened before, hasn't it? Let's try it this way. Can you see it now? No?
Yes.
Now you can?
Yeah, there's one. Yeah, now I can.
Okay, sorry. All right, again, RE framework. All the preheating your stove and going to the grocery store, running down to Publix or Kroger or whatever it is you shop. You're going to go and do this in the initialization state, because these are all things that you need to even start your process. We can't make cookies unless we have the appropriate ingredients. You'll notice in the initialization state, the first thing you're going to see is a try catch, right? We're trying and we're catching any errors. If you scroll down, you will see the catches and the finally that we talked about earlier. Here in the RE framework, what it's reading is it's saying the system exception is nothing. And you're maybe asking to yourself, why are we saying the system exception is nothing if the system exception is obviously nothing because it hasn't run yet? We're just making sure the bot understands there are no system exceptions when it starts. And then it's going to read your configuration file, that Excel file we just talked about. It's going to initialize that configuration file, and it's going to start so that it can drag it, so it can read that Excel file and bring any arguments or any definitions you've got in that Excel file into your automation. Then it's going to kill all the processes it may have running. And we have this here because in organizations, when you build automations, many of us build these on virtual servers or virtual machines, especially if they're unattended. So if you've just finished an automation, or an automation is just run that had Google Chrome, Amazon on it, looking for Lego Christmas presents, like I just did for my son yesterday, and that didn't close when that automation ended, then it's that web page is still open. This just makes sure that it's everything, that environment is clean and clear. And then you're going to start your log fields. Now, this is max consecutive system exceptions. This is part of every RE framework template. This basically says, if I have a system exception and I haven't handled it correctly, or I didn't know it would happen, the bot's going to keep running to that system exception each time. You've got this loop going, and the bot's continuing to hit the system exception. It's going back and starting over, going back and starting over. And I'll show you why it does that in a moment. This just allows us to determine how many times we want a system exception that we did not know was going to happen to continue to loop through, okay? And then we're going to invoke this additional all applications workflow. This has to do with what I was talking about. We're going to turn on our oven and heat it to 325 or 350. And again, don't ask me for the appropriate temperatures because I'm not really sure what preheat an oven to. I'm a microwave guy. So we're going to turn on our oven. We're going to gather all the items we bought from the grocery store onto the countertop or the island, and we're going to prepare to make some cookies, right? That's what we're doing in here. It's just another blank sequence where we can start putting in our preparatory steps. We may add something in here. Let's just say, let's do a log message just so we know what we're doing. And we're saying, long field. And then we have another sequence or here or another activity here that says gather ingredients. Then we may have another one here that says, and I'm just using log messages here. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit more involved. Read the box or find grandma's cookie recipe and lay it on the counter. Right? That's everything I'm doing in order to begin the process of making cookies, right? Maybe you have one in here, gather all the utensils I need. Kick my little sister and little brother out of the kitchen. Put on my chef's hat and my apron. Whatever it might be, turn on the radio, listen to some dubstep while I'm cooking some cookies. Whatever it might be that you need to do to begin the process of making your cookies, that's what you're going to put in this initialization state. And your bot's not going to leave that state and go to the next state unless it's successfully done it, okay? So these are what we call transitions. So here we have a system exception. The stove doesn't work. I forgot to get eggs. My little brother's being a brat and won't leave the kitchen. Whatever it might be, the radio doesn't work. These are system exceptions. These are exceptions to what your original process was, and we handle them here. So we may have system exception is nothing. That means it's going to go, if you look at the arrows, it's going to go and do something. If the system exception was a failure, it's going to do something else. So it's going to go to end process. It's going to stop everything. In your RE framework, it's going to go and it's going to stop everything, right? And you may, in this end process, may have a sequence in there to tell you to turn off the stove because you don't want to leave the stove on while you run to the store and get eggs or go lock your little brother in his bedroom, right? You don't want to leave the stove on necessarily because you don't know how long that's going to take. And you don't want to burn down the house, right? Those are system exceptions. If you've got everything successful, you have another transition here. That system exception is nothing. There's nothing wrong. I have everything I need. It's quiet. I'm ready to go. So it's going to go to get transaction data, right? Get transaction data means we're going to start gathering all of our ingredients. We're going to start mixing everything in the mixing bowl, that kind of deal. So in get transaction data, we have first this check stop signal. When you get into Orchestrator, you're going to understand this a little bit more, but I'm just going to touch on it here. In Orchestrator, you can stop a process, an unattended process, and if that process is transactional, you're using the RE framework, Orchestrator will communicate to your bot to stop what you're doing. If your bot's in the middle of processing a transaction, the bot's going to finish processing that transaction, then it's going to stop. It's not going to fail. It's just going to stop, right? So here is only Orchestrator checking to see if you've pushed the button stop. Okay, if you haven't, it's going to go down here. And if you notice here, you have an if statement for the stop. Is there a stop signal? If there's not a stop signal, I'm going to go get my transaction item, which could be my flour, my eggs, my milk, my chocolate chip cookies, whatever it might be. And again, you'll see another try catch. I'm trying to get all of my ingredients into the bowl, which we could say is this get transaction data, right? And here you have some more try catches. I'm going to go, whoop, I got out of there. I'm going to go and get all these transactions into my bowl. And I'm going to say, okay, I need this many chocolate chips. I need this much flour. I need this much milk. These are all transactions. These are all ingredients going into your process. These transactions are usually tied to an orchestrator queue, which you will get into in the future, near future, actually. But these are all things that are in your queue, which your queue right now is your countertop. You're getting all these things in the bowl, right? Go back to main. And we'll go back to main. Okay, so it's going to keep processing that in your bowl. Filling your bowl may be part of your process transaction. It's getting your chocolate chips. It's going down here, says, do I have chocolate chips? Here's your transition. Yes, I have chocolate chips. It was successful. That arrow is going to point back up to here, get the next transaction, the next recipe ingredient. Do I have the flour? Yes, and so on and so forth until there's no more transactions to do, right? Once you have all your transactions items, you can go into your process and look, oh, there's another try catch, right? You can go into your business process and you can start mixing your bowl, cooking your cookies, laying them out on wax paper or on a cookie sheet, checking your oven to see if it's at 350, putting them in there, setting the timer, getting the first batch out, spatuling them onto a cooling rack, so on and so forth until you've made all your cookies, right? So we're done making our cookies. There's nothing else. There's no system exceptions. There's no business exceptions. The stove didn't stop in the middle of it. Your grandma's recipe asked for a cup of flour and you put a cup and a half in there accidentally. That would be a business exception, meaning you didn't follow the recipe. You took it upon yourself thinking, I know what I'm doing now, whatever that may be. Once all that process transaction is done, we set our transaction status, which basically means it's either successful, I was successful in making my cookies, I had a business exception, or I had a system exception. Now let's go back to that loop we talked about on the system exceptions, the max system exceptions iteration. So you can see, let's find our system exception arrow. I'll expand these out like Jeffrey did last time a little bit so we don't get confused. Okay, my system exception arrow is this guy right here. If you notice, when you have a system exception, the stove broke, it goes all the way to the top and starts everything again. You're trying to turn your stove back on, that kind of deal. So this is where that max iteration number comes in, which you can set on your config file, and it will keep going through this loop until that max number is reached, and then it will stop, right? Otherwise, it's going to continue this system exception all of the time, over and over and over. If you're done and you've told it you're successful, you've got all the cookies you need, you're putting them in the Tupperware and you're taking them to your little brother's soccer game for snacks, you're done, success. It goes back to see if there's anything else you need. There is not. There's nothing there. It's going to end your process. If you have a business exception, let's say in this case, you needed a cup of flour and you put a cup and a half in there, and you got to figure out how to get that half a cup back out of the bowl, or you're going to empty the bowl and start over. This is a business exception. It's going to go back up here and say, okay, you have no more flour. You threw it away. Now let's do the flour again. And let's do the ingredients again. Okay, it's not going to go start everything over. It's just going to go get a new transaction, a new recipe ingredient, so that you can go back in here and finish your cookies. Again, once your cookies are done, there's no ingredients here. It's going to go and end here. You can, in your end state, you can, and look, another try catch. You can say, okay, I'm going to turn off the stove. I'm going to put them in this Tupperware, and we're going to head out the door, and hopefully no one dies from the cookies that Chris just made. That is the RE framework, and it's important there because here, within here, these, you can insert take a screenshot, right? You can take a screenshot using a screenshot activity. Take a screenshot. Okay, you can take a screenshot, and the bot will take a picture of what it sees. That little guys also included down here in your system exception. It's going to take a screenshot and look at another try catch. Here it takes a screenshot here. Okay. So it helps us as developers, the RE framework helps us as developers to catch exceptions. We don't have to set try catches up for everything. Of course, some of us still do. Helps us to take our screenshots, helps a lot in exception planning and in process control and process flow. But remember, when you're working with a state machine, as we talked about last time, your bot is not going to leave this state until everything in this state is done, and it can pass through either one of these transitions, successful or system exception. The same thing on any of these states. It's going to stay in those states until it's done in that state before it transfers on to the next state. And then when there's nothing else to do, it's going to transfer to the end process state. Anybody else, MVPs, have anything to add about, I know that was high level RE framework. Jeffrey?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I think try catches is a huge help. I know that we're going to probably dive deeper into it when we go over, debugging and stuff like that.
Right.
But it is a great way to control your process without letting it, kind of, as we were saying before on the last session, of the control to make sure that your process is either successful, truly failed from at the end of the process without letting it interrupt the continuity of everything that you're going to be doing within it. So it is a huge tool in control flow, and also to detect exceptions that you might not even have encountered in the past. Because if you have a try catch all the time with a global exception, if anything happens, you can send an email to notify somebody, you can log it in some Excel file or data service or whatever the case might be, and keep track of what those exceptions are so you can handle it afterwards. For your system admins, this is going to be huge.
Right. So any questions from I know this is kind of, we're jumping into things that you're not going to necessarily learn in the next couple sessions, but Jeffrey and I felt it important last week to familiarize you with this information. It can sit in the back of your heads for a while. And then when you get to try catches and you get to the RE framework, you say, oh, I know how this works. I know what this is about at a high level. It might make it easier for you to work within it, because this RE framework is I deliver solutions to the U.S. government. Everything in the U.S. government has to be built in an RE framework. Absolutely everything. And I've worked for 10 years in the commercial side building automation. I've built almost 500 automations in my career. Most everything in the commercial side has to be built in an RE framework because of that exception risk, and you're mitigating that risk. And when you introduce a risk into an integrated system, whether it be in the IRS or Medicare, Medicaid services, wherever it might be, or if it's going to be in the middle of, if you're working for Stryker or some sort of organization out there that uses RPA, or Pepsi, or Frito-Lay. Pepsi, Frito-Lay is the same company. Most organizations have some form of automation, programming in their organization. Now, I'll tell you this. I don't know if you've ever heard of Walmart Store 8. Walmart Store 8 is not a real store, but every time you go into Walmart, you go through a self-checkout stand. That is a bot. That is a bot that's processing your purchases, telling you how much you owe, processing your payment. Walmart alone has 5,000 separate automations that they use in their stores. If you go into a Walmart, you're walking down the aisle, they're changing their seasonal aisles from Christmas to Valentine's Day, and you see those sheets on the shelves that say, this is what goes here. That's a bot that does that. Bots process what they need to order. So most organizations have, and Walmart does use UiPath, most organizations have some sort of automation program. So, and all of them are going to require that those automations be built in an RE framework. So we felt it was important for you to kind of get a introductory jump in this deep into the pool without swimmies on your arms. Introduction to RE framework. So, any questions on your side, Dr. Newfield? Okay, I'll take silence as nothing. And any general questions before we give you a little bit of time back? None? Going once? Going, did Jeffrey, was there anything else you wanted to cover off on control flow before we give them some time back?
No and yes.
Okay.
I wanted to bring up the issue that I was having last week, which, you know, sometimes on the fly you kind of don't see the error right in front of you. When we were having the control flow of the date time, and I don't know if Dr. Newfield found it afterwards, but it was one of those rookie mistakes. I was making the logic of the date upside down. Dates to me sometimes gets a little confusing. So when we were doing the check of the date, I was basically saying, is the date that we have that was default lesser than today? And that means that it is newer. If I wanted to evaluate that to true, as I wanted to determine if the prom date was correct, I needed to either invert the variables or invert the operator. So this is just a side effect because I think logic is not something that we cover on these not in complete depth, but logical, mathematics is very important to understand if something is not evaluating correctly. And in given time, I didn't want to dive too deep into it, so we kind of just went over it. But it's what's going to make or break your logic on your system, as we saw last time. It was evaluating to true as it should. Had I done it correctly, it wouldn't have. But it was just an interesting thing that I wanted to add as a note, because at the time I was just baffled by why I couldn't get the prom date, to assign correctly. But that was why.
Jeffrey, thanks for bringing that up, because I think that's really critical that we talk about those types of things, because it's real life, right? And what that helps to do is point that out as something people can look to do in the future. So thanks.
Of course. I think I learn from my mistakes more often than I do from my successes.
Mhm.
Now we just got to get Jane to take you to the prom, right?
Yes, if only Jane would accept me.
All right, guys. I put a recap on RE framework in here. I'm not going to go over this. It'll be in the slide deck Diana has. But since we're not going to be learning this for a while, I just wanted to put this here in case you ever want to get back to it. It's going to go into a little bit more depth than I really want to, as far as the RE framework on just showing it to you. But Diana will have these 5 slides out there with you next time. And she's recording everything we talked about as it relates to the RE framework if you want to refer back to the recording. If nobody has anything else for me, Diana, do you have anything else for the class?
No, I think this is great. So again, we're going to start next week with the email. I think we're in good shape. Dr. Newfield, if you you find you're still behind on anything, please just let us know. And if you need us to cover anything else, otherwise, we're going to leave what we've gone through so far over to you. And I think next week sets us back on being caught up with where we need to be, so we can complete this part of the courses through the end of the year. So
yeah, and
sounds good.
One more thing, Dr. Newfield, if any of the students get behind and they get so lost and they want to work with some of us individually, I think we can arrange it. Speaking for myself, I can't speak for the other MVPs. I can certainly arrange an hour or two here and there in the evenings to talk with them and walk them through and answer their questions. The only question I would have related to something like that is, does there need to be a separate permission granted so parents are aware?
Now, as long as the teacher's on the call as well, then we're good. And so my students know very well that my schedule, while it appears busy, and my daughter, who's probably sitting in here, is probably shaking her head, while my schedule might be busy, I would still figure out a way to make sure that we fit your schedule and the student's schedule, even if it means I got to be on an earbud.
Okay. That works. Just that's an option because I speak for myself. Like I said, I don't have a problem jumping onto a hour to help a student walk through what they're not understanding.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yeah, and just let us know, Dr. Newfield. We're here to help. So I think we're all good for today. So everybody, okay, we'll close this one out and just keep us posted. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Uh-huh.